On the Way Home is proudly supported by Elliston Community Builders. Community Builders has become a national leader in affordable housing. We've done it by developing innovative initiatives that can change the way Canada builds. Community Builders provides certainty as a service, managing developments from concept to occupancy. We help with early-stage feasibility, design development, funding, and active project management to deliver communities Canadians can be proud of, from coast to coast to coast. So if you need more affordable housing faster, please visit communitybuilders.elliston.com to learn more. That's communitybuilders.elliston.com to learn more.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Michael Braithwaite.
Hey, welcome to the On the Way Home podcast. So great to have you back. If it's your first time listening, thank you for tuning in. Every week we have incredible guests who have seen the challenges we have in housing and homelessness, healthcare, meaningful employment, and not just complain, but really worked to be a part of the solution. This week is no different. My name is Michael Braithwaite, and I am so fortunate to be with you this week on the pod and talking about these issues. I learn so much every week. I really nerd out about this, but this is really what the podcast is all about, is addressing challenges and sharing solutions that could be duplicated or you could be a part of across this country, around the world. We have guests from all over this planet. We are more alike than we are different, as we saw in our international podcast last week or a couple weeks back around refugee housing. My team at Blue Door, if you want to find out more about us, go to bluedoor.ca. They do incredible work across York and Durham and a little bit into Peel with our Construct program. Over 120 people working really hard, grassroots organization doing great work. So bluedoor.ca, check that out. This week on the pod, we have a young man, not just a name, but also in stature. We have Matt Young, who is the CEO and president of Republic Developments. And Matt talks to me about his journey into this work, doing a little work with his uncle, figuring out what he wanted to do, like most of us do, got into real estate development, and started working away, then started his own company, is working on all sorts of big projects in the GTA. Talks to us about one that he's doing in Scarborough that's really cool, where he took land that was really not useful to anyone and now is creating a massive community. I think it's 7,500 new units and a grocery store and all sorts of different things that make a complete community. It's really, really cool. So we hear about the work he's doing at Republic Developments, but what he wanted to come on and talk about is in the middle of the housing crisis right now, a lot of construction and development is ground to a halt. Much of what was happening in the last couple of years was we were able to do that because we had low interest rates, cheap money, we got things done. But as interest rates went from 2 to 5%, no longer cheap, that ground to a halt. And a lot of projects that were due to be developed had to be renegotiated or were stopped just because it's too expensive to develop housing. And what can we really do? And so Matt came up with the concept of CANT, or the Coalition Against New Home Taxes, and himself, led by himself and his team, got some others on board, and with the idea of making a pledge as a developer that if government was to cut tax, developers would meet them dollar for dollar, meaning that if they cut the taxes by 20%, and he talks about the houses, the taxes on a new house being 29%, almost 30%. And I think he said they were 12 when he first got into it, and that wasn't that long ago. And if they were to cut it by 20%, what a difference it would make. And the pledge would be that developers would match it dollar for dollar. So all of that would come back to the consumer. So housing would be 20% cheaper. And so real progress. And so he's had talks with Sean Fraser's office federally, with Minister Calandra's office in Ontario. They're meeting with Mayor Chow and the team soon. It was really, they're hearing him, and he's pushing. Stage 2 is let's push for action. So we talk all about that. This is someone who is really leading real change, significant change, if we could push this through, and came up with a solution that could really make housing way more affordable. He said there was lots of talk about supply, not enough talk about affordability, and that's really what's weighing on the minds of Canadians. And so we could go to his website and be a part of that change, write your representative. But you need to listen to this conversation. I love when people take it upon themselves to take action and not just complain. And Matt Young is definitely one of those people. It's a fascinating conversation. We find out so much more about the solution that he's built out to make housing affordable. Let's go to that conversation now. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Matt, thank you so much for making the time to join us on the show today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Michael.
We ask the same question to everyone because it's a very personal question. And that first question that I want to throw at you is, what does home mean to you?
It's a good question. To me, home is the place that you're safe and comfortable. It's sort of your refuge. For me, that's downtown, and Toronto as a bigger place has always been my home. I've done a lot of traveling in my life, and I've always come back here and loved it, and always felt like I would never leave here. So, but I think it's a place you're comfortable and safe. That's how it is for me.
I love it. Simple and very, very true. Matt, want to learn a little bit about you as one of our guests, first-time guests on the show. Can you talk to me a little bit about your journey into where you find yourself now?
Yeah, I guess it sort of started sometime in university where, I was one of those kids who didn't really know what they wanted to do when they went to school, and spent summers trying different things and talking to a lot of people and trying to figure out what might be interesting for me. And I ended up working for my uncle for a summer, basically like painting buildings and doing labor work. But he owns some apartment buildings in the beaches, and he wasn't necessarily a developer, but he was a commercial property owner, and took a lot of pride in what he owned. And so I spent the summer cleaning up one of the properties and just loved the tangible aspect of real estate. But I always had a really creative side of my brain, and I felt that this would be really cool, but what would be even cooler is to build something from scratch. And so I then went down this rabbit hole of doing research and learning that a real estate developer is a job, that's a career. And I then spent the last 2 years of university trying to figure out how to get myself into real estate development. So I graduated in 2007. It was a really tough time to graduate. We were just starting to experience the recession that kind of really hit in 2008. And so I went back to, I couldn't get a job. I went back to school in 2008 at the University of Calgary. I did a postgrad in real estate development there. And I figured if I couldn't get hands-on experience working, I should get some education. And then I came back in 2009, spent a bit of time traveling. I think September of 2009, I came back. The market was starting to really recover here, and got offered my first job, and kind of had my head down ever since.
Very cool. And now you are the CEO and president of Republic Developments. Tell me a little bit about Republic Developments.
Yeah, so we're a mixed use, mostly residential developer focused on high-rise transit-oriented communities in the GTA. So, most of the product that's been built over the last 15 years has been right in that wheelhouse. All of my experience working has been doing high-rise transit-oriented type projects downtown and around the GTA. And so it was a natural progression when I decided to start my own company that I would focus on what I really understood. We are branching out a little bit and starting to expand a little bit more given where the market's at today, looking at things like purpose-built rental. We have an asset management business as well, and thinking about some other areas where we can kind of leverage our expertise. So, that's kind of the gist of what we do.
Very cool. Are you working on anything exciting right now?
Yeah, we have 8 projects on the go right now. The most exciting one is the Scarborough Junction project. It's a 26-acre master plan with over 7,500 units, and it's just a really exciting project because I grew up in Scarborough and I understood Scarborough really well and knew that there was a real need to maybe bring a larger vision to Scarborough. and something that would sort of, I think, leave a lasting mark for that community. And so we've been working at that one for about 5 years, almost 5 years now. And, we finally got our approval, and still have a lot of work to do now to kind of take it to the next step. But that's been one that's taken up a lot of my time and energy and creativity for the last 5 years. And then we have, another project that we just got approved in Parkdale, which is really exciting as well. We're waiting to see what we're going to do with that project, and then of course we have our Bellwoods House project in Trinity Bellwoods, which went to sale last year, and we're just chipping away at sales and working our way towards construction on that one.
Very cool, very cool. I think you mentioned something in there, I think, for our listeners to understand, when you said we got approval, or it's been 5 years. And so from, idea of, hey, we might want to do this, to shovels in the ground can take, 3 to 5 years? And Toronto has some of the longest approval periods, isn't it?
Yeah, very long. That one was unique because it was such a large project, and I think the amount of scrutiny that was on that project was very high. I think we also got caught in kind of a funny period politically, where we knew that there was huge demand for housing, but it seemed like the city hadn't got the memo. And so when we submitted our application, we actually thought we were going to be met with a lot of positivity. We were taking away what was effectively an industrial brownfield wasteland and turning it into an incredible mixed-use community with new retail, grocery store, community center, daycares, 5 acres worth of parks, tons of new housing opportunities, a new GO station. It's literally the exact recipe that every municipality around North America is begging for. And somehow Toronto didn't seem to respond in the way I would have expected them to. And so that ended up being a really hard fought battle, frankly, unnecessarily. And, ultimately, the outcome we expected we would get, we eventually got. It just took probably 3 years longer than it should have. So, but I think had that happened today, I think it would have gone quite a bit quicker, because it seems like municipalities now, there's a lot of incentive for them to approve more housing. Obviously, the province and the federal government clearly recognize now that housing is a real problem. We have a shortage of housing. We need to be building more housing. And so they're trying to do whatever they can to get approvals going. I think the challenge now is, what's the next step? Because a home isn't a home until it's built and you've handed over the keys to that homeowner or to that renter. And you can do everything in the world to approve tons of housing, but if you don't have the conditions to actually build the housing, then you still don't have homes. So if you got step 1 and step 2 right, but failed on step 3 and 4, well, you may as well failed on step 1. And I think that's kind of the situation we're all in right now.
Yeah, I mean, so many challenges too, and it's not a simple process, and so many things that need to change. And let's talk about that today. We want to talk about CANT, or the Coalition Against New Home Taxes. What is it all about? How did it come about? Who's all involved?
So it's really about how do we deliver housing more affordably in order to make it more affordable for people to own or to rent. And it was led by myself and my team at Republic, but we worked with a coalition of 18 other builders who all stepped up and put their reputations and names on the line to sign a pledge. And the concept for us was, nobody wants to make more money. We all just want to build housing. And the problem we're seeing in the market is that there's a big discrepancy between pre-construction housing, and which is required to build more supply, which we need, and resale housing. And so how do we bring the price of pre-construction back in line with the price of resale? And so we studied and started looking at this back in October of last year, and sort of came up with the idea in January of 2024. And we looked at, where is the savings, if we went line by line in a pro forma, where are the areas we could actually save money, And it became abundantly clear very quickly that the number one place would be taxes. And it was also the place where pricing had escalated or inflated the most in the last 15 years by far. It wasn't even close. And so we really wanted to focus a campaign on taxes. And it was also, conveniently enough, the one thing that government, if they cared about this and wanted to act, they could act on it almost immediately. So it's not something that's going to take 5 years to work its way into the system. It's something we can do immediately tomorrow to make housing more affordable. And so it just seemed like a great opportunity. And when we put the idea together, our concept was nobody wants to make more money. We want to make sure we pass the savings on to purchasers so they can actually afford the housing that we're building. And so we said the best way to do that is sign a pledge and put some reputational risk on the line so government and the public knows that we're serious about this. And the pledge is for every dollar of tax saved, we will drop our prices dollar for dollar. And that includes interest charges and other costs that would come down as a result of the taxes coming down. And so, taxes today account for 29% of the cost of a home in Toronto, a little over that. And we think, based on the taxes we're asking for, we could drop housing prices by 20 to 25% pretty much overnight if the government did what we're seeking. So it's a meaningful ask. It's a meaningful reform that I think would make a difference for people immediately. And so we're trying to pound the pavement here and get the word out.
And what is it's incredible when you think about dropping housing prices by 20%. I think we're kind of chipping away at it, but none of these things are making a huge difference. But that would be that's a difference maker. To do that, what has the response been so far?
It's been really positive. Media, the first thing everybody had fears about is, okay, this is just going to look like a bunch of developers looking for a handout. And that was the whole point of the pledge, was that, hey, let's make it very transparent. We don't want a handout. We just want to make housing more affordable. And this is how you bring pricing down. And so media really responded well to it. And the public really responded well to it. I was paying attention to a lot of the chatter online on Twitter and other places. And it seemed like a lot of the feedback was, this is great. It's good to see some responsible developers, socially conscious developers who are trying to do the right thing. And, we should be encouraging this type of behavior. Government called us right away. So we did get calls from the federal government and the provincial government very quickly. We ended up having meetings with both Minister Sean Fraser's office and Minister Calandra's office to talk about it and to socialize the idea. And so conversations are now starting there. We do have now a meeting coming up with Olivia Chow's office as well to have a conversation with her. And, and so I think the beginning of the campaign has worked out great. We're now, have a seat at the table and we're starting to have conversations. The question now is government willing to act? And if so, how long is it going to take them to act? Because every week, month that goes by, the problem is getting more and more severe and is going to be much harder to recover from the longer we wait.
And aside from all that too, the cost of housing now, when I think about, it's really starting to hit now where construction is slowing down because of interest rates going up. There's a lot of projects that were, again, as we talked about, they take a long time. You start with different interest rates and it takes time for interest rates to catch up. They are catching up now, putting costs way up. So construction is slowing down in the time of a housing crisis. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It's bizarre. Like we know we have a shortage of housing. We know we need to build more housing, and everybody wants to build the housing, but it can't be done. And it's really because over the last 15 years, we have built a system that relied on ultra low interest rates to function. And as soon as rates went up, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. Governments for far too long have been looking at housing as this cash cow for them, artificially keeping other taxes low but charging more and more on the construction of housing. And when interest rates were dropping and we had, huge immigration and a huge need for more housing, It was we were priced relatively competitively compared to other global markets. People were looking at Canada as a great place to invest, and a lot of investors were scooping up that housing. But then there was a certain point where it sort of passed the point of it being reasonable, and pricing had gotten to a point where it was starting to be consistent with other global markets, other global cities. And, and it just, when you had 1.5%, 2% money, people could afford it. But when you have 5% money, all of a sudden, which actually historically is pretty typical, the system didn't work. And, when I started in the business, taxes were 12% of the cost of a condo downtown. So for every $100 spent to build, roughly 12 of that went towards taxes. Today, that is almost 30%. And it's almost 30% on a home that costs 3 times the price. So taxes have actually gone up about 600% in the last 15 years to build housing. So, clearly that's a problem. And, I think now governments have to take a step back, realize that, what worked 3 years ago no longer works today, and we have to take a different approach on how we get housing built. And we can't look at it as this giant cash cow that we are entitled to. And that's sometimes, unfortunately, the way municipalities are looking at it. Especially, they're saying, well, where are we going to get the money to pay for infrastructure? Well, I think there's a lot. Where did you have the money to pay for infrastructure 15 years ago? You have raised development charges. Toronto, as an example, have raised development charges 1,200% in 15 years. If they were able to pay for infrastructure 15 years ago, why can't they pay for it today? Maybe, they need to be looking at how low property taxes are. Maybe they need to be looking at working with provincial and federal partners on finding ways to, maybe get more transfers in exchange for getting more permits and more homes built. Like, they have to be resourceful, I think, here. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but the alternative is you don't build housing, you have a city that young people can't afford, and you're going to see more and more people leaving the city every year, making it a city only for the rich. And unfortunately, that doesn't work long term. So there are going to be some difficult decisions, but they have to make them. That's what their job is.
I keep coming back to this quote because I love it, where recently at an AMO conference where Mike Moffat said you can't have nurses living in Halifax serving the city of Toronto, meaning like you have to be able to afford to live here. And you're seeing that, right? Teachers, nurses, different people can't afford to live where they work, and those commutes are just crushing people. So you're right. It's interesting too that, and I don't know if this has happened to you, where because those waiting times are so long too, and the costs have gone up, some of these projects that were supposed to happen are just not, because now, or they're trying to renegotiate to say, we said we could do it for this, but that was 3 years ago or 2 years ago. And now, as you've mentioned, everything's gone way up, costs have gone way up. And so we'll lose money on this, so we just won't build, or they're at a standstill, right? In a housing crisis. So something's got to give. I think what you're suggesting here is reasonable. And it's interesting too, I think, because when you talk about could you increase taxes, city taxes, that kind of thing, I think for politicians sometimes, and listen, not to put words in their mouth, but like to do that is seen as like, almost the kiss of death that you won't get reelected. However, to pass that on to, they're going to pay them indirectly anyways if you pass it on to housing costs, right, to you guys. But people don't see that passing or raising taxes on developers, as people see a developer's wealth, they can pay it. What's the big deal? What they don't realize is what you've just said is, listen, that all comes out in higher housing costs and housing not being built, right? So there's got to be a balance on here. So what's next? You've had these conversations. You're saying, are you waiting on government? Now you're all 3 levels, which is amazing. What is next? What are your hopes for the future?
Well, we've got phase 2 of the campaign that's going to launch probably in early October, which we're really excited about. I think that's going to get a lot of coverage. And the goal for that is to really speak to the general public in Canada to help them understand what the issue is. And hopefully to get them to speak up and start reaching out to their representatives to say, listen, this is a problem and you need to be taking this seriously. So that's the next step. We're going to keep putting the pressure on. We are not stopping. We're going to continue to be loud and annoying and frustrating for governments until they start to take this seriously. And by the way, we're not trying to be difficult. We're trying to highlight a problem and saying, like, guys, this is an emergency. You have to pay attention to this. And so we want to work collaboratively with government to try and solve it. And that's what we're doing. We're coming up with solutions. We're trying to suggest ideas, and we're even willing to help work with them on how to, find ways to politically, make it palatable for people. But we need a seat at the table to do that. And thankfully we've started to get that. So I think the next step from government is, come back to us and let us know, what you're thinking and what you're able to do. We have heard encouraging things, I will say, from the federal government. At least what they said was encouraging. The question is, will they act? And if they do act, when will they act? And so we have our eyes on the fall economic statement, and we're going to see if there's any discussion around taxes on housing when that happens. I think that's in November. So, we're going to keep the pressure on until then, and hopefully we can see some action happen.
Yeah, federally, that's probably your last before we have a change in government and things get a little messy, right? Yeah. So let's hope there is and you mentioned before, there's an urgency to this. I mean, the crisis is now. We've got to act now. Big changes, small changes aren't doing it. We've got to take some big swings at this. So if people are listening to this podcast, they're like, "Hey, how can we get behind this? This is great." And what I love about what you're saying too is because there's been other pieces where developers have said, because listen, let's face it, whether you love the private development sector or not, they build most of the housing that's out there, affordable or not. So they're a part of the solution. There's been, hey, why are we giving rebates, or why are we making it easier for them to access money? And but this is real teeth around, listen, every dollar that we save here, we're pledging, we're going to put it in writing that it comes back to you. So real teeth. So if people want to get behind this, how can they support you?
Best thing is go to cantwin.ca. That's the website for the coalition. And there's a few things you can do there. You can email your representatives, which would be great. Let them know that this is a problem, that you think it's an important issue that they need to be paying attention to. And by the way, I think the general public does feel this way. I saw a stat about a month ago that said 49% of voting Canadians think housing affordability is the number one issue on the ballot for next year. And so if that's true, then this is the number one thing that can be done to help make housing more affordable. And so that would be the first thing. The second thing is there's social media assets. If they want to share things on social media and put the word out there with others, that would be amazing as well. And then when our second phase of the campaign comes out, there'll be more opportunities to engage with us and engage with government officials and spread the message too. So.
Very cool. Very cool. I encourage people to do that. I absolutely will when we're done with this podcast. Lastly, if people want to reach out to you, want to find out more about Republic Developments, the 8 projects you're doing, how do they do that? How do they find out or follow you on social?
You can follow me on X or on Instagram. It's myoungto, and I think it's republic_dev for the Republic handle. And you can even email me. It's myoung@republicdevelopments.com.
Now, all right. So lastly, I'm just thinking about, you could have done nothing, right? You could have just sat back, or you can complain to your friends about this is, or different colleagues or whatever. What lit the fire under you? It's one thing to say this has got to change, but you're being the change you want to see, as it's said. What lit that fire? What got you that fired up one day to say, maybe I can actually make this work?
I've always been a very action-oriented person. So I've never really been one to kind of sit around and wait for things to happen. I've always found that, if you want something done, you have to sometimes do it yourself. So, I was watching the market and, watching, projects struggling and, construction starts were stalled and just nothing was happening. It was like everything was completely frozen. in the middle of the housing crisis, like we talked about before, and it didn't make any sense. And so you start to figure out where the problem is, and you're like, okay, well, how are we going to like change the conversation? There's been such a concerted effort, and I think a good concerted effort over the last 3 or 4 years to put pressure on governments that supply is a problem. We need to build more housing supply. And finally, that narrative has become sort of prevalent in the conversation across the country. And it's the right narrative. We do need more housing supply, but housing's complicated. And to build more supply, you have to create an environment where you can build that supply. And so, the first part of the conversation was great, but then they were missing the follow-up, which is how do we make sure that the supply that we're able to build is affordable enough for people to buy, and we can get the kind of housing that we need. There's also this constant talk about, well, the housing being built is super small condominiums, and that's not the product we need. Well, it's a product people can afford. It's the most affordable ownership product or rental product available. And so if your focus is on trying to allow more people to have housing security and that sort of security and comfort within their home, then you need to be building product that they can afford. And in order to do that, you either need to build smaller and smaller product to make sure that the end price is more affordable. And that then brings up the issue of, shoe boxes in the sky, or you have to reduce input costs to build it so you can build more comfortable, sustainable product, let's say, but at a price point that people can afford. One of those two things has to happen. The industry has been responding as pricing has gone up by shrinking units smaller and smaller. I don't necessarily think that's the right outcome we want, but right now it's the only outcome that you're going to get unless you can make the price of building housing cheaper. So, I think something's got to give here, and hopefully government's paying enough attention that they're going to act quickly on it.
Well, Matt, I'm so glad that you got fired up and not just complained, but figured out a solution. And I'm hoping that, with phase 2, that you're able to push this through and really make a huge difference in housing affordability. And listen, if we want to make that happen, listeners, go to the website, check it out, get behind it, write to your representatives. Listen, like 10 years ago, housing wasn't even really in the top 10 of election issues. And now it's number 1, right? Affordability and housing. And so people are paying attention. So the time is now. Matt, thank you to you and your team for all you do and for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us on the podcast today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.